I want to take you back to 1787. Now, for those among you who recall eighth grade American history, you'll remember that that is the year that the Constitutional Convention was held. From May until mid-September, a room full of men in Philadelphia working out the political boundaries of the states and the federal government, resulting in what we now refer to as the Constitution of the United States. While they were busy in Philadelphia all through that summer, four men were defining the physical boundary between the states of New York and Pennsylvania. Two men from Pennsylvania, two men from New York. The written agreement said that the border between New York and Pennsylvania would first follow the Delaware River until it reached the 42nd parallel of latitude, and then a straight line following the 42nd all the way across until it intersected the shore of Lake Erie. Indeed, the folks in Pennsylvania wanted a substantial section of Lake Erie to be within their boundaries because that would be their connection to Great Lakes commerce. So those men struggled all summer long. It took not only the skill of surveyors and their state-of-the-art 18th century surveying equipment, it took courage, because they had to make their way across the wilderness. If you look at a map even today, and you look at what lies on that 42nd parallel, you will see nothing. It's rocks and trees. So not only were they skilled in surveying, they were wilderness survival experts. And in those years, dealing with panthers and rattlesnakes, it took courage. Have I said courage enough? I think maybe I can drop it after this. Courage. They couldn't finish the job that summer. It was too arduous. They had to come back the next summer. It's now 1788. And finally, they're able to make their way all the way across until the 42nd parallel hits the shoreline of Lake Erie. And to everyone's surprise, that left Pennsylvania with only 4 miles of Lake Erie shoreline and not even a substantial harbor in those 4 miles. This was unacceptable. Now, they could have tried to renegotiate, the Pennsylvania folk could have tried to renegotiate their border to the west with the state on their western border, which you might think is Ohio, but it's 1788, that's called Virginia. And settling that border nearly brought on a war, so they weren't going to mess with it. They renegotiated the border with New York, involving the federal government. And the idea was that instead of having that border go straight across along the 42nd parallel, at some point they would drop a line of longitude and square off that corner, which is how New York State looks today. Well, where exactly should they drop that line of longitude? What they worked out over the next several months was a notion that the surveyors would go up into Canada and locate the western end of Lake Ontario. And where the lake ended at the western point, they would drop a line of longitude, and that would become the corner defining the border of western New York State. In fact, they specified the most westerly bent or inclination of Lake Ontario. I'm quoting the New York State Constitution. So the next summer, they got a late start because it took a long time to work this out. We're now at 1789. George Washington has just been inaugurated, the first president of the United States that spring. And 3 men from New York, 3 men from Pennsylvania begin their journey on horseback, of course, to locate the most westerly bent or inclination of Lake Ontario. They arrive at Fort Niagara at the mouth of the Niagara River, where it empties into Lake Ontario. And there, the leader of the expedition, Andrew Ellicott, who'd been appointed Surveyor General of the United States by President Washington, Andrew Ellicott approaches the commander of Fort Niagara, the commander of the British garrison in Fort Niagara. Now, those of you who are paying close attention are wondering, how is it that the commander of the British garrison at Fort Niagara, how he's in New York? This is the United States. Well, the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War, stated that the boundary between Canada and New York would be defined by a line going down the middle of Lake Ontario. Everybody on the ground knew that what is now Western New York was British territory. The British and their allies, the Iroquois, lived there. That was British territory. How could that now suddenly be in the United States? How could that be in New York? And so here it is, 1789, 6 years after the Treaty of Paris concluded the Revolutionary War, and the British are still there. They are commanding the fort at the mouth of the Niagara River. And so Andrew Ellicott arrives and says to the commander, we're here for this expedition. You should be receiving instructions from your governor allowing us to come through. No, sir, you may not enter this country. You must leave, and with haste. Well, they've come a long way. They're on a schedule. It's late in the season. They're tired. Well, perhaps we could just conduct a scientific expedition to see the Great Falls on the Niagara River while you wait to receive your instructions from your governor. No, sir, you may not visit the falls. Too many people have seen the falls already. You must leave this country. Well, we're tired. We would be content to just wait and be confined to a small parcel of land while we wait for that letter to, no, sir, you may not, you must leave this country. Well, desperate, Andrew Ellicott pleads, we're tired, our horses are tired, could we stay for lunch? And he finally concedes, allows them to stay for lunch, and then has them escorted out of Western New York to the Genesee Valley, where they wait. They had not anticipated this expedition to take so long. They've run out of funds. They have to sell their horses. Finally, they receive word that the letter from Lord Dorchester has arrived and they may enter the country. They get canoes, they paddle their way across along the shoreline of Lake Ontario. They enter Fort Niagara and they're permitted finally to enter Canada. And then they're on foot, making their way with all their equipment to the city of Burlington at the western end of Lake Ontario. And they find the Bay of Burlington. Now, the Bay of Burlington, here's the western end of Lake Ontario. It's triangular. There's a bar, a sand bar that blocks off the mouth of the bay, and it trails off to a triangle. The most westerly tip of the triangle is 8 miles distant from that beach that separates the bay from the lake. There's a little channel so that boats can get through. Now, reasonably, the surveyors from Pennsylvania say, well, the most westerly bent or inclination of Lake Ontario is the bar that separates the bay from the rest of the lake. This is a big deal because from the other end of the bay to the bar is 8 miles. And because Lake Erie lies at an angle, when you draw down those 2 lines of longitude, it's 11 miles of shoreline. And the men from Pennsylvania want those 11 miles of shoreline to be in Pennsylvania rather than in New York. And further, if you extend those lines down to the 42nd parallel, it's 150 square miles. So this is no piddling bit of real estate. Needless to say, our surveyors from New York say, no, the most westerly bent or inclination of Lake Ontario is the western tip of the bay. All that land and shoreline belongs in New York. Well, back and forth, it's the Pennsylvanians versus the New Yorkers. Now, of course, if I were there, I would know how to resolve this conflict. I would take out my cell phone and I'd call the home office and I'd explain the situation and await their instructions. Well, it's 1789. They have to wait 150 years for the telephone to be invented. The telegraph is 50 years away. They don't even have the Pony Express. They're going to have to solve this conflict on their own, keeping in mind they're behind schedule, they're over budget, they're in hostile territory. How are they going to solve this conflict? So they had a drinking contest. They had a drinking contest and we lost. And that's how New York State got its western border.